Hey, John,
Whoa, we're back.
we're back.
Nick, we've got to get a new intro. We got our Conrecki intro there with our Lake
Yeah,
and
I
Shed
was.
stuff. I know we're the
St-
Lake and Shed twins, but I think I think we've got to get a new. So we're opening up for suggestions here.
oh, that would be
Any-
great.
Anybody have any great film ideas for the John and Nick show introduction? We'll be happy to do our best.
Yeah.
Please, clothing is not optional. Clothing is a definite thing here. Anyway, that it. Uh, I'm looking forward to those suggestions. My wife's the filmmaker. Incidentally, speaking of my wife, um, you can go to marygranger.com and see what she does. You know, a wonderful medicinal cook in her 70s. Um, but people are upset because when they get paid subscriptions, it goes to um, Mary Granger OKC, which is where we live, because it's her Stripe thing, whatever the payment thing goes through, and she handles all the finances for the show. And so don't be upset if you get Mary Granger OKC and
Yeah.
your
You're
box
not.
saying there's a charge.
You're not buying cookery lessons, although the cookery lessons are great. No, you're,
That's
you're subscribing to this channel,
anyway. Boy, Nick, the threads have been jumping
haven't
on our
they?
posts. Yeah,
Art. It's always a joy, of course, to talk to you. It's sort of highlight of my week. But I think second to that is reading the comments as they come in. It really does make this worthwhile.
yeah. I guess for me, the richest part about it is not only the great ideas that are coming in, which are in a way embarrassing, like why aren't these people on the show? But the it's that the sports generation approach,
Yeah.
the golden threads, the Lake Springs, the shed tools. These people really, you people, hi out there, really get it,
Yeah.
and it's so rewarding to get people to when people really begin to grok on what's going on with Rolling's artistry and meaning. Um, Really, the best I've felt about being, the so-called dean of Harry Potter scholars since Deathly Hallows came out. This has just been so wonderful. Anyway, enough raving on. Maybe we should dive into those threads and see which topic among the threads is the most interesting to you, Nick.
Well, there's so many. Um, I mean, uh, we've had some talk about the pea and fish.
Okay, let's go pea and fish right away,
Okay.
because this is a great back and forth thing.
Yeah.
Um, a listener named Juliana, various spellings there. Juliana, you're confusing me. Uh, um, Wrote in to say, what about that dead fish Travolta? Doesn't that mean that Ryan Murphy's on his way out? And I was like, what? What is she talking about? And then she explained, what led her thinking in that direction. And I was like, oh, okay, totally missed that. But I'm very relieved that the Travolta thing, I didn't miss Travolta and Murphy, because Travolta played a part of a guy who looks just like Ryan Murphy in a movie. I was like, okay, it wasn't that. Um, I feel old enough, Juliana. Don't blindside me with something I can't possibly know. But then I shared Nick and I have been discussing on the back channels
Yeah.
about the pea and the fish. That really really Rolling's planning was the depth of it was revealed when we started getting the frozen pea stuff in Hallmark Mail. We had suggestions of it in the past, but
Yeah.
really that pea in the ring in Cuckoo's Calling as a symbol for strike. That this pea was caught in the engagement ring, and that was a problem somehow after she has one of her first fights with Matt Cunliffe. That all of a sudden we get the peas again. We get the peas again in Lethal White.
The mushy peas.
Wait, no. Yeah. The trip, that's Troubled Blood, isn't it? Where they
Yes,
go to Skegness,
that's right.
and we get Yorkshire caviar,
Yeah.
mushy peas, and Strike is like, can't possibly eat that. Well, if it's a symbol of him, why would he want to eat that? That's just a little cannibalistic, right? Auto cannibalism. Anyway, but Robin's eating it up. Uh, and then there's other stuff. There's the frozen peas he puts on his face when he's hit with a spade. The spade is like all things mining, is a symbol of digging into the unconscious. And so Stryker, of course, gets the spade right in the face in Sark because he's really trying to manipulate Robin unconscious, her subconscious or whatever, this whole thing, set her up for the big reveal, and bang, right in the face with that one, baby. And she gives him the frozen peas. And then, of course, the peas are used to revive the dead Oranda goldfish named Cormoran. Now, what is all that about? Well, a reader over in the weblog said, hey, do you know that Strike is the name of a very popular pea breed, a pea species? Where I was like, no, I didn't know that, right? I mean, that hasn't been mentioned yet. Everybody about corn and things like that, but it's a pea. And then there's the thing with Sandra Hope, who's I've got to look her up, make sure I get her name right, because she's been doing such great work, really. Okay, there's Vicky, and where's Sandra?
Sandy Hope.
Sandy Hope, that's it. Really, and she's a subscriber. She's corresponding with me. One of the ideas we had was that we just read some of the letters we get to start off the show. We should do that. Every show we should have one of the best notes we get from people. Because that's also something which is spectacular is I send stuff out to the paid subscribers and they write back with these long notes that are brilliant. And I share them with Nick and we say, oh, what are we going to do with this? Anyway, Vicky writes in and says, just had a thought, Ray John quoting from A Blood Scene. Robin calls mushy peas by a familiar term, Yorkshire caviar. Caviar is, of course, fish eggs. And poor Robin, Yorkshire-born, spends much of THM agonizing over the thought and pressure of freezing her eggs. Oh, all right. Juliana mentioned the frozen peas. Strike puts on a swollen face after the spade hit. Maybe this is foreshadowing to their intimate and honest dinner conversation later, with Robin bearing her heart to Strike about her ectopic pregnancy grief. Could be. Really, the whole Oranda fish thing is a great example of one of my favorite rolling tools we never talk about, Nick, and that's mise on abîme, which is sort of the story within the story, the scene inside the scene. It's really a painting that has a painting of the painting inside the painting, and you'll see like an infinite progression in that, the painting inside the painting inside the painting type thing. But it's come to mean the story inside the story, and Rowling is really masterful at this. My favorite example of this is the snargle of pods in, I think it's Order of the Phoenix, where they're in a no, it's Half-Blood Prince, is it? Yeah, it's Half-Blood Prince, and they're in a herbology class, and there's this stump that looks like there's nothing there, and then you try to get into the stump to get one of the snargle of pods, all these crazy vines come out of it and wrap you up, and and then when you finally get the pod, the vines snap back in, and then you cut it open and all these slimy, worm-like things are crawling around in it. Well, if you don't see the sexual imagery in that among adolescents, you're really missing it. And that is in the backdrop to everything going on inside Half-Blood Prince. There's this tension, especially between Hermione and Ron, and and Harry and Ginny and everything. But that snargle of things is absolutely silent background material that gives you that coloration of what's going on inside the story, and that's Rowling's mise en abîme little trick. I mean, she didn't invent that. It's got a funny French name. Clearly, it's an old hat thing. But
that's true. That's true of Cupid and Psyche within Metamorphoses.
This is the story inside the story thing, which is really the whole story. That's really what Rowling is doing with things like alchemy and all those stuff, she's trying to get you to experience the soul's purification towards its perfection in the spirit via all these subliminal influences that support what's going on inside the surface story. So you're getting that at multiple levels simultaneously in your unconscious mind. Brilliant stuff. Well, what's that to do with the Oranda fish? Now, these are ugly fish. They get to be huge. So I don't know how big this tank is inside the office, but these things get to be really big. I mean, these things are like carp, and they're ugly. You know, they have these big bubbles on their heads and this and that. And this goes back. This sort of like they were crowned, and so there's someone that must someone who's a spiritual leader of such. I mean, I'll put the link down below to my Oranda fish post when it was their Twitter header. But how this works that this thing works inside the story is she has Robin and Cormoran. Robin's the pretty one. Cormoran's the darker, ugly one. Pat always, him never talks about Cormoran or Strike, and the third one who is just named Travolta, kind of like, and these are or Elton. These are the stars and beauties of Pat's youth, and I think specifically this is a reference to Tony Moreno, the star of Saturday Night Fever, which doesn't end well for the lovers. Anyway, it's a that Travolta dies, isn't saved by the peas. You had the suggestion somehow that he's killed by the peas, that he's Cormoran knocks him off. That makes Juliana say, oh, that must be the symbol for Murphy. And we're going to see something different in the next book. Okay, that's a fascinating idea. But what we're really seeing is inside the story is Strike being represented by that fish. And again, you have to go back to Rowling's favorite painting and see what fish symbolism does in that. And that this is the ichthys fish, and so you have this sort of Christ-like quality. Of course, one they revive Cormoran rising from the dead when he gets this essence of Cormoran, the pea, and he's saved by that. That is going on multiple times inside the Hallmarked Man. So it's again this is great background stuff. And Juliana, great catch, and Sandy and Vicky and all the other people that have been writing about this. Thank you, because it's taken my thinking about that fish thing in a different direction. But it's that's the kind of artistry and meaning we're dealing with inside this story. Now, when people hate this book or are disappointed with this book, Nick, it's not because there's not enough stuff at the allegorical and anagogical level. It's because the surface story doesn't quite work. Now, and we've been talking about this for a while, but I want to do a bit of a deep dive on this today, if you don't mind. Where we talk about. I'm going to put it on you, though.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, we've been saying the mystery of Hallmarked Man is disappointing because, among other reasons, it seems that Strike and Robin, not to mention the Metropolitan Police, who are always stupid, going all the way back to Sherlock Holmes, there's always a stupid Met guy in there, that they should have figured out that there was something wrong with the crates and with William Wright the very first time they watched that Ramsey Silver surveillance footage. Bad camera, I know, but there's just some things they should have gotten. If you compare Strike's examination of that footage in chapter 20 with Robin, they sit down for the first time and do that, and their final look in chapter 113 when he figures out what happened, and they both do the what information that he's gained over 90 chapters helps him to figure out what he and everyone else missed before.
Okay, I'm not gonna blame Cormoran, and I'm not gonna blame the Metropolitan Police, because I think there's three individuals.
So it's Robin? It's Robin's fault?
No, there are three individuals who really messed up on that first examination of the videotape. The Metropolitan Police, they were led by an inspector who basically knew what he wanted to find. So he was proving that the body was the underworld and had absolutely nothing to do with the Freemasons. So he wasn't that interested in finding extra evidence. There's Cormoran, who I think uniquely wasn't that interested in the case. So this is the only time he's ever taken a case for ulterior reasons. So he's taken this case to basically manipulate Robin's relationship with Murphy. Most glaringly, he refuses to examine the possibility that Decima's partner is dead. Won't spend any time in investigating that possibility, because that's not what the client is paying him to do. Well, this is completely at odds with what he told in Lethal White to Izzy Chizzy.
Yeah.
So he told Izzy Chisel, Izzy just wanted Strike to investigate her stepmother being a murderer, and Strike said, no, the client does not dictate to me what I investigate. The investigation will take me to the truth, whether the client likes it or not. Well, he's not investigating with those morals, and you see it not just taking the case, but all the way through. So this road trip was not in pursuit of advancing the case. The road trip was in pursuit of advancing his relationship with Robin, for which he's charging the client. So he's not investigating this case properly. So there are reasons for Cormoran spotting it and the Metropolitan Police not spotting this the problem with the CCTV, which leaves, John, us. Why didn't we spot it? So those of you
I'm gonna before you go, I'm gonna push back a little bit on this.
Okay.
Because the Masonic Metropolitan Police officer was right. The whole Mason thing was totally misdirection.
Yes.
So, I mean,
but
how is that a mistake? He makes a different mistake. But go on. I mean, I want to hear some more of this.
But he's not the reason why he got the identification of the body wrong is because basically he stopped identifying when he had that result.
Okay.
Those of you who've gone back and reread will probably have already done that, because when I got to the end of the book and I thought, why didn't I spot that? I assumed that Rowling did as most mystery writers would do. The description of the first time we see the CCTV would be subtly different to the second time. So actually the key bit isn't in focus, maybe slightly out of focus, but we couldn't have spotted it. But no, she played it absolutely straight. If you go back and you reread that initial description of the CCTV, it's all there. So we get the 3 big boxes. We get to the discovery that this is the wrong silver. We see the silver being carried upstairs by a lone woman who then looks for a bag to put it in. And none of us, or at least I haven't met anyone yet, said, wait a minute. She's carrying that out on her own in a bag, and it took 2 hefty blokes to carry it down the stairs. This doesn't add up. But okay, so what's our excuse? What's my excuse? Well, a little bit like the Metropolitan Police, we were given the explanation of how the murderer got there. We have the CCTV footage of the individuals walking down the street. That's who the Metropolitan Police believed were the killers.
And Strike believes that at first.
Strike believes it, and of course, so do we. We have no reason not to. So we're not thinking about how can we smuggle a killer in there. It isn't until much later in the book that we find out actually that group was a group of students who have a rock solid alibi as to how they cannot be the killers. By then, of course, we've forgotten about the tape, and we're as surprised as Strike is when he reviews it again.
All right, so you've excused Strike, the Met, and us. What's Robin's excuse? Is she with us?
I think Robin's with us. Yeah, I think Robin's with us.
I think Robin's not only with us, but Robin's having a rough book. Okay,
Yeah,
she's just out of Chapman Farm. She's just lost a fallopian tube
Yeah.
and a child, and she's in agony about her relationship because she's doing the whole Matt Cunliffe show again, taking care of him, whatever. She's doing all the things that Psyche is not supposed to do on her way through hell. And this is and she's on she points this out. Please don't yell about John the misogynist in this. She says, I'm not sure I want to go back on contraceptive medication because I don't think I need any extra hormonal difficulties in this. And sure enough, when she starts taking the hormones again, that's when she really begins to, all their symptoms just start to just take way off. And she's pushing, unlike Strike, she's like, wait a minute, let's follow this hyphenated friend of Rupert's, what's his name? Albion. He's got the whitest name in history, right?
Yeah.
Albie Spencer White or something. It's just like, wow, how white can you get? Talk about the albedo. Anyway, this first, it's like Albus Dumbledore appears, as a young man. Anyway, she's like, let's follow him. He's got the answers. I know it. And she talks to him at the end of part 2. And those of you who are paid subscribers, you've gotten my videos about really the part 2's influence. And I'm not going to go into the structure of part 2, but I will say that part 2 starts part 1 is just welcome back. Here's what we are. Here's sort of a sketch of why we're taking this case. Part 2 is the case. It's by far the longest part of the book, 17 chapters. It has a sort of a turn, but the big thing about part 2 is you get 5 trips through the case. You're going to talk to Kenneth Ramsey at the very beginning. And Robin and Strike going through that immediately afterwards in a pub. That's just one. Then we get, well on towards the turn, we get Robin and Strike sitting down and going over the film frame by frame. That's pretty heady. And then on the backside of part 2, we get Robin's, wonderful interview with the silver store owner, the sister-in-law of Kenneth Ramsey, who is clearly in a death spiral in terms of her relationship with her husband and in agony about everything that's going on. Her nephew has died. I mean, she's really in a rough way. And Robin, being Robin, takes care of her and gets all the information out of her. And they go through the entire process again. And I think it's there we learn that, no, she didn't see what was in that last crate. She opened up all the crates until the last one. And then, of course, she's taken off scene by that text and the phone message. And so that's our big screaming, what was in that last crate? Because they struggle to get that thing downstairs. And there's nothing. Why is that last crate, which is really just the chandelier from the silver vault, why is that last crate so ridiculously heavy? And this is where the mystery fails for me, Nick, is because when they go down the stairs with that last heavy crate, there's a pause there, and we know from what they said about the spray pattern inside the vault, that's when William Wright is murdered. And so he comes out of the crate, murders Ian Griffith, comes out of the crate, murders him, and then has to put on, new clothes. But how could he possibly match the clothes that William Wright is wearing that day? Because he's brought these things in. So he's not wearing William Wright's clothes. Those are found in the stash afterwards. He can't possibly match the clothes. So I don't care how bad that film is. The clothes are different. But the biggest one, Nick, is he's 6+ inches shorter than the guy.
I think even if the CCTV was so bad you couldn't make out the clothes, the size is difficult to hide.
Nick, how tall are you? Do you mind sharing that information here?
So I'm 6'3".
Okay, and your friend in Oklahoma is 5'4". I'm rolling size. You tower. There's a picture of me at my PhD graduation where it looks like you're taking me for a walk.
It looks like you're sat down in a chair in front of me.
That's and it's a great, it's Mutt and Jeff type thing. I love that. It's a fun thing. I'm glad that I try to stand as tall in this picture as I possibly can, so I don't look like this short guy. But anyway, I'm again, Rolling and I. The joke is I don't see eye to eye with Rolling except when we're at a party and she's in flats, because if she's wearing heels, she's above me. Now that I'm a small guy. Well, small guys, we spend our life with our head up like this, and a particular angle of our neck is what normal is. So we don't really think of ourselves as short necessarily, because everybody's at the same angle. And so I'm looking at them eye to eye when I'm looking up. When I lower my head to look somebody in the eye, I think, wow, this guy's pretty short. And when I lower my head, I think, oh my goodness, is this guy park in the handicap space? How short can this guy be? Now this guy, Ian Griffith, supposedly is 5 feet tall. Nick, 5'4" is 2 or 3 inches below the global normal for men, with a lot of Asian people in there to drive that thing down, because in the United States it's like 5'10". But that being 5'4" means I'm aware of height. Believe me, Nick, nobody doesn't notice a 6-inch difference in height. It's just enormous.
Yeah.
I'd have been in the Olympics if I was, 6 inches taller. I have a heart that's the size of my lungs, so I could have, been that guy. But anyway, that's just, to a short person, that's just like how, and knowing the author is a short person.
Yeah.
Who wears 3 to 4 inch heels when she's around rugby players, so she doesn't look like, I don't know why.
She still looks tiny. So I remember that photograph of her stood next to Doddy Weir, and you're thinking, these are 2 different species.
And you can tell she's aware of it. She's sort of like, oh, gosh, these guys are enormous. So that's where the thing fails to me. It's just like, come on. And nobody ever mentions how short this guy is. That college student that, the Swedes or whatever, that I think they're Germans, that he takes pictures of her as well as her roommate, and never do they say, Klein Bischen, this guy's a little guy. No, that's a fail. I'm sorry. That's the footage. They should have said, wow, this guy's a lot shorter and he's wearing different clothes than the guy who went downstairs. Anyway, we didn't see the footage. Nobody comments on that.
No.
But that's an editor's mistake. Or again, it's, I talked about this, the art of the mystery story, that there's really the formula for the closed room mystery.
Yeah.
The locked door mystery. And I know, Nick, there's not a locked door here. I can feel you biting that back, but see, Rowling has said it's her version of a locked door mystery. And in the genre, that means you can make it as ridiculous as possible, so long as you get an explanation of how it was done. I don't see how, especially after we get the 4 students, whatever, on the street thing explained, I don't see how they don't go back and say, wow, that last crate is really, really heavy. And the guy coming up is wearing different clothes and is a midget. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just can't be the same guy. That's how it happened. So that's a fail.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry if that bores you all out there. I just want to just nail that down, that the surface story doesn't work. Now, we've talked about, the 3 things we know for sure. Yeah. The first one is people are going to roll their eyeballs about that one forever. But the more important things are that we're set up for the next 2 books.
Yes.
And there couldn't be a better book to promote the 4th generation thesis, because this book is, all of its importance is at the allegorical and anagogical level, because the surface level is so disappointing.
Okay, well, let's talk about themes then. So at the big marketing push for this book, it was all silver. So we had that Twitter header of the beautiful neph. People around the world found out what a neph was. we
That's true.
we had the trip to Sark, where she purchased this beautiful silver necklace with the Sark flag on it and the two lions. At the same trip, she talked about Maid of the Silver Sea. So we've got a lot of silver references. Now, silver at the moment is very valuable, and it's getting more valuable, and
Whoa.
so is gold. A lot of the silver we get, I guess, comes from the New World. I mean, the Murdoch silver in the book came from his mines in Victorian mines in Peru. Now, I know you've done a bit of research into silver and its place in Western society, its place and importance. So could you tell us a little more about that?
Well, Nick, you have come to the man to talk to you about silver. I mean, you have found your source. Those of you who've gone to my Wikipedia page, you know that I was not born John Granger. Of course, I wasn't born with any name, but the first name that I was given was Alan Granger. And as a student of chemistry, you know, I took advanced placement chemistry when I was actually into chemistry. What metal, Nick, would I have been fascinated by with the name Alan Granger?
Well, so with the initials AG, which I think is the Latin argentum.
That's it. Yeah, silver, periodic table of the elements symbol is AG, and so I always thought that was just so neat that my initials were silver. And then you get into alchemy and what it means at a depth level, and you find out that silver is the white stage progression from lead and tin to silver to gold. And that doesn't make any sense until you understand it in terms of light, that lead is hard darkness, and that the illumination brings you first to tin and then to silver. That's the end of the white stage, is the silver thing. And then it becomes gold, which is solid light. Hard darkness to solid light is the alchemical process. It's about illumination. It's about enlightenment for the alchemist. And silver and gold have always been as valuable as they are, even though they're not the rarest of metals, because of that light symbolism. And silver has always been considered a shadow, if you will, of gold, always been a much lesser value than gold because it's less obviously light. The astrological equivalents of this are the sun and the moon. The sun is the light, and the moon is the reflection of that light most clearly. So that, but it's still dark out when the moon's just reflecting that light. So it's a lesser light, and it's a reflection of that light. So silver is less valuable than that. Now, historically, and this all comes from I just learned this a couple weeks ago. There's a wonderful Substack called Uncharted Territories by a man named Thomas Pieo. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his name, but if you go to Uncharted Territories in Substack, it's really a fascinating thing. Now, this guy is he and I, Nick, you and I are in absolute agreement, and you and I sync on all of our opinions compared to me and Thomas Pieo. You know, I mean, this guy is out there, you know, in terms of his stuff. I mean, he's big mask, lockdown COVID apologist. I mean, you know, but his thing is showing how geography is destiny in terms of political spheres, history, all of those things. And he wrote a post just a couple of weeks ago about how silver changed the world, and how silver flooded the world, subtitle, and how that replaced feudalism and the church with capitalism and nation states. Now, this again, this is not only in Europe, but in China as well. And it comes in Europe, it comes down to the Great Bullion Famine, as he calls it. So what Thomas calls the Great Bullion Famine, consequent to the Black Death in the mid 14th century, you know, it kills between a quarter and half of the population. Now, what happens then is there's a huge drop consequent to that in the production of silver. Now, this is not only because of the Black Death and the lack of miners, but it's because the mines in Europe were running out of gold and silver. The veins were being drained. And also at the same time, what silver mines there are in the Balkans and points west have been taken over by the Muslims. The Ottoman horde has taken over these mines. So, wow, we're without, the metals we need to create coinage. And so the coinage is being debased and chipped, and this marvelous illustrations of this how silver flooded the world, because when the new world is discovered, all of a sudden we get a flood of bullion, silver and gold, mostly silver though, comes into the United States, and comes into Europe as such. And that creates the currency, really the fluid of capitalism, so that trade can go on. We're not just bartering things. All right.
So there was a nickname for King Henry VIII of Old Copper-Nose, because silver was so scarce at that time that they were actually making their silver pennies out of copper with a thin layer of silver on the top. And when you wore the king's head away, you'd see a little copper nose.
That's great. That's great. And technology plays a part in here, because the reason they couldn't dig any more silver, this is true of all mining, is that the deeper you go with mines, the more likely they are to flood. And once a mine floods, if you haven't got the technology to pump it out, you can't mine anymore. Well, the technology of pumping also comes in at this point. Now, again, read the article to find out how this is happening. But A.H. Murdoch's silver that he gets from Peru becomes the Freemasons, who are occultists, basically. They're esoteric Christians or esoteric ecumenists or whatever. They make their materials out of silver. All these emblems and badges and such, they're nefs. They make those things out of silver because of silver's alchemical meaning, this illumination. So, Rowling has taken a fascinating piece of history, of occult lore, and really psychological significance, because you go through these stages on your way to illumination and your perfection in the spirit. So for the albedo stage, and this is Robin's albedo stage. I mean, she's the one going through the nightmare here. She's the psyche going through hell. She has these experiences with these religious groups. The Universal Humanitarian Church, and now the Freemasons in the backdrop. Those are not traditional groups, but they do have spiritual content inside their, fraternities or cult-like activities. That's the backdrop Rowling uses for that representation, and it's wonderfully profound. And again, the silver hammering there is so rich. Really one of the best things that Rowling has done, I think. All right. Whew. Let me look back and see what my question is for you, Nick. Okay. Incidentally, that's why there's a silver vaults complex in London, is because the British Empire becomes the British Empire largely in the wake of the bullion flood into Europe, and the Brits take their share of silver, and so they have this Gringotts vault complex in London, which is really hilarious, right? I mean, it clearly is the model for Gringotts. That woman voted. Nobody has ever stolen anything from the silver vaults. It's like, oh wow, where have I heard that before, right? And it's down below the ground. You can imagine not the trolls, but not the dwarves.
Goblins.
The
The goblins.
goblins, the things. That's anyway. That was a lot of fun
And
for me.
one of those goblins is called Oliver Vander, which I think is just marvelous.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we finally. I don't know if that was in Steve Vanderark's book or whatever, but that
Yeah.
clearly was Rowling's model for the Silver Balls. We don't know if Oliver Vander was named that after
No.
Rowling's book because there's some confusion there, or whether that was the model for Ollivanders. I like to think that it was the model, but all right. But now for the big reveal. This is something that only you can get at Hogwarts Professor Substack is the genius of Nick Jeffery
Oh,
digging
crumbs.
into Welsh books here. All right. So Nick and I
All
have
right.
talked about.
No,
You
go on,
know,
go on, go on.
all right, okay.
Oh.
Nick, when I went to Wales to pick up my degree and to meet this giant of a man, I Welshman no less, met me at the airport with a leak. He didn't. Anyway, this this I apparently I brought a book fascination with me, and it was a Welsh book, so I was real excited about talking to a Welshman, though it was actually an Englishman living in Wales, anyway, or a Cornishman or a Canadian. Nick, you're really the United Nations here. Anyway, this or the Commonwealth at least. You're the Commonwealth, hero. Anyway, I wanted to share with him this new book series that I was reading. It's not a new book series. It was quite dated at the time, but it's by an author named Harry Bingham, and he has a character, the Welsh Sherlock Holmes, Fiona Griffiths.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I was over the moon about this book series, and I wanted to talk to him about it because it had all these Welsh things inside of it that I didn't understand. So it was kind of the backdrop to our conversation about that visit. But
I was reluctant at first, so I'm still quite early on in my reading literature for pleasure and profit journey. I'd my literary heroine is Jane Austen's Emma Woodhouse, who creates these wonderful lists of all that is best in literature and fully intends to read them. Well, I constructed my list largely using John Granger's book, Harry Potter's Bookshelf, and Beatrice Grove's Literary Illusion in Harry Potter, because I'd fallen in love with Rowling. Now I wanted to fall in love with the rest of English literature, and I had these wonderful lists of books, and I got to meet one of my two heroes, John himself, in person, picking him up from an airport, and all he was doing was talking about this Harry Bingham. He hadn't won any prizes, people weren't feting him in the street. It's just more detective fiction. Well, John is fairly persistent, and eventually it occurred to me, look, John has recommended at least half of my book list, and I'm enjoying the book list. I ought to give this guy a chance, and boy, did I. So this is my recommendation to all of you out there in Substack and YouTube land.
Listen to John.
Listen to John, and listen to me. Harry Bingham, his Fiona Griffiths series is wonderful. It's very well plotted. It's extremely readable. There's a lot of depth to it, and in terms of authenticity, he talks about my home area, which is mid South Wales, sort of between Cardiff and West Wales. He knows the area well. I know the area extremely well. He put one of his witnesses in my hometown of Llantwit Major, for which I bless him. Not a lot happens in Llantwit Major. But wonderful book. It has a conceit. The hero, Fiona Griffiths, is mentally unwell, and that's a huge. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, but that's a huge plot point. So it had that sort of thematic link with the Cormoran Strike series, but there were a couple of things.
I'm going to interrupt here, Nick.
Yeah.
The reason we haven't talked about this is there hasn't been a real, just in your face reference in the book, just like, but here in Hallmarked Man, we get Ian Griffiths.
Yes.
Now, if you're mean, Nick, you can say that's John Granger in disguise. He's a really short guy. His first name is John. His last name begins with GR, with a sort of a Christian symbol there. I get it. Rowling is taking a punch at me. you know. But we can also look at Ian Griffiths and say, it's a hat tip to Fiona Griffiths.
Yes, it could be, but what really got me thinking was that there's and in one of the books there's a lot of surveillance equipment as part of the plot, and there's an appendix in that book where Harry Bingham talks about surveillance equipment, and he talks about, just to describe the weird and wonderful things that exist out there, this recording device that is concealed like a power outlet, a wall socket. And if you know UK wall sockets, they're quite big, chunky things. We don't have these little tiny American wall sockets. They're big and square and solid, and 240 volts. You don't want to play around with it. So and this device fits basically on top of the installed wall socket, looks like a wall socket itself, and is a voice activated recorder, exactly as described in Lethal White. And this book came out many years before Lethal White. In fact, I think it came out even before Cuckoo's Calling. But the strange thing is that recording device that he describes, although of course it appears in Lethal White, it's exactly the thing that was in Lethal White, it doesn't appear in the plot at all.
Now, there's a cover for this, Nick.
Yeah.
Rowling worked for a surveillance, when she was temping.
Yes.
So she could, research that. So that's a link.
Yes.
But it's not a clincher.
It's not a clincher. And I don't think we've got a clincher yet. We've just got some weird conspiracy-like theories. And here it comes. Here's my conspiracy-like theories. So John and I spend many hours, days, weeks, months talking about Rowling's indebtedness to her friends and colleagues. So, and there were some mysteries which we think we've solved. We have certainly solved DB Mac, so we know who DB Mac is now. We are almost as confident, not quite, but almost as confident we know who SOBE is. I think we know who that is. Now, there's another guy called the Backdoor Man, and I drew an absolute blank at who the Backdoor Man is. John came up with some blues music references, which seems to suggest the Backdoor Man is an adulterous gentleman. But I think it's unlikely that Rowling would publicly acknowledge and thank an adulterous gentleman for his assistance.
She mentions her husband on the same page in the acknowledgement page. That's kind of that's a little dicey even for Rowling, right?
I think it's unlikely. But there is another plot in the Harry Bingham books about a criminal world guy who, to evade surveillance, enters an office and is seen entering the office and leaving the office. This office backs onto another office. There is a connecting door, and that's how he makes his connection to the person of interest without surveillance being able to spot how that happens. How is this relevant? Well, aside from writing really quite popular books, Harry Bingham is also a professional writing coach, a creative writing coach. He holds courses, and they seem to be quite well attended. He hosts seminars and writing retreats, and we know he has assisted, or he has said he has assisted a celebrity who was planning to write detective fiction. So our conspiracy theory is that Harry Bingham was brought on as a consultant to J.K. Rowling because he already started writing these Fiona Griffiths novels, just about how you write detective fiction. Neither Rowling nor Bingham would want Harry Bingham to be seen walking into the front door of Rowling's Edinburgh house, or indeed the front door of Rowling's Edinburgh office, although its location's fairly closely guarded secret. But if they could get at least to an adjoining office, maybe Harry Bingham was the backdoor man who met Rowling coming through that connecting door.
I find that more than incredible. I find that more than incredible. I think that's somewhere between possible and probable, Nick. That's a
yes. It's certainly somewhere between impossible and possible.
I mean, really, if the only thing we get out of this is people start to read the Fiona Griffiths mystery, that's a great victory. Oh. And when you get to some of the more absurd Fiona Griffiths stories, because I mean, sometimes they just go totally off the wall. I mean, it's sort of like this one we just had, though his doesn't have gaffes like Hallmark Man has. It has small investigations into things in the ports, turning into international drug trade things that are, Eastern and Western hemispheres. I mean, it's just wild,
We have King Arthur at one point. Yes, it's really
my favorite one is the one where they have a church group that is not only cloistering but is sequestering people in cells so they can pray around the clock.
Yeah.
That was kind of like okay, Harry, that's just a little much. But anyway,
what disappointed John and I in the Harry Bingham books is the series just sort of stopped. So, but I have great news for everyone who does get into Harry Bingham. There's a new book coming out this year, so the series hasn't stopped. It is still worth investing your time into this series.
And just to share this, in case the woman at Swansea University, whose name is sort of like Fiona.
So Fiona Griffiths is a proud Welsh woman. She has some of the Welsh language, but the way her first name is spelt and pronounced is English. It is Fiona. There is a Welsh version of that name that is spelt slightly differently, so that the F sound in Welsh, you need two Fs together. If there's only one F, it's a V sound. And it does not end on a vowel. So the Welsh name is Fionn. A lovely.
Can you say moron? Moron says.
We met a lovely Fionn in Swansea.
Yeah. Well, how many times did I call her Fiona, Nick?
A few.
Anyway, she was very polite. Yeah, God bless her. All right. I'm gonna do some more UK stuff here. We just gone through Wales and stuff like that. Nick, there's there's inside jokes here that Americans don't get, and so you're my man on the scene there. There's things like Gateshead.
Okay.
There's things like pit ponies. And there's council flats. And I was like, okay, I'm bouncing that one to Nick.
All right.
It's vocabulary time.
So we spoke about these yesterday, and I have a correction for John yesterday. So Gateshead is a town in the north, very far north. We would call people in that area Geordies. They have a very particular northeast accent.
You're talking about England's north, because it's obviously well south of Scotland, right? I mean,
but this is about as far north in England as you can get before you start being in Scotland. So it's really very far north. It's on the Tyne side. So the Tyne is the big river in that area, and the big urban areas there are Newcastle, Sunderland, and smaller than both of those is Gateshead. It is the location of quite a famous now huge statue by the M1 motorway called the Angel of the North. Um, but its architecture hasn't been universally loved. So yesterday I blamed G.K. Chesterton. It was actually J.B. Priestley. It was J.B. Priestley who basically said that the way Gateshead was built was not fit for human beings. Uh, and this was
No,
in
no human civilization could have produced this
no,
architecture. I mean, that's
yes, yes. So it's post-industrial. At that time in Gateshead, there was a lot of building in the new modern material of concrete, and I think more famous is John Betjeman's poem about Slough for many of the same reasons. So only a few years later, 1937, just a few years before a world war, Slough is being redeveloped, and John Betjeman says, "Come, friendly bombs, and fall on Slough. It isn't fit for humans now. There isn't grass to feed a cow."
I mean,
Yes.
how that couldn't have aged well during the Blitz, right? I mean, that's gross.
No, well, but I think it was funny enough that even people from Slough were quite proud of it. Um,
So why do they choose the name Gateshead, which is really a reference
so,
to
so,
Capricorn,
so
right? It's goat's head, but what is that?
Yeah, so it derives. I mean, when I say ancient times, I mean ancient times. So it has a mention in Bede's ecclesiastical history of Britain, where we can tease out the derivation of it. In Latin, it was the goat's head. So it's just evolved from goat's head to Gate's head. Um, it's not an immediately comic location. Possibly the accent is seen by the rest of the UK as being comic. It is definitely a regional accent, and it's an unusually thick regional accent. My feeling is if you're running a London detective agency, it is so far distant from London while still being England, it's unlikely to be the real location of an investigation. So it would be a good code word because Strike is not really going to be asking Rowling to go up to Gateshead.
I hope you meant Robin.
Robin, yes.
All right. So
Okay.
what about Pit Pony?
So pit pony. So pit pony is a pony used in mining. Um, in that brief period between it being unacceptable to use small children to haul carts underground and steam power being able to do it much cheaper, ponies were used in mines where the adit is the connecting tunnel that connects the above ground to the mineral rich seams, where the adit is shallow enough for a pony to traverse. Not true in the Cornish tin mines. The adits in the Cornish tin mines, because hard rock or almost all straight down, so you got to the mine faces via ladders. But of course, that by then, when the Cornish mines were getting fairly deep, the Industrial Revolution was at full swing, and everything was brought up, both water and minerals using steam. So pit ponies were bred for the job. They were small, hardy, and stocky. We have the remnants of the herds still existing. So we have the Welsh mountain pony, we have the Exmoor pony, uh, Dartmoor ponies. These are the kinds of ponies that were used for this commercial role, and they, in its heyday, there were worth thousands of them.
Now this is where, as an American reader, we have Kiara Porter having this conversation with Valentine Lancaster, and she says, "Oh, is this PP pointing at Robin?" Now that
Yes.
means that Lancaster has been talking with everyone about Robin and Charlotte and Cormoran. I mean, this has become a thing where Kiara Porter is obviously she has an interest in Cormoran because of her liaison with her in Cuckoo's Calling. But that he's referring to it as a nickname in Charlotte's suicide note. I mean, this is an amazing little reference there. And Lancaster really comes after Robin with the PP thing. Now, PP to Americans is playground slang for penis. And we see that in Piers Polkiss and Peter Pettigrew. His name also has, that resonance. But that, I was just clueless. What is a pit pony? Now, I come from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And I live in Oklahoma. These are mining states. Believe it or not, Oklahoma, not only for oil and gas, but originally was mining. Mickey Mantle comes from here, and his father was a tin miner. Now that I've never heard of a pit pony. Now maybe there were, but you look up pit pony in Wikipedia, you find that there are tens of thousands of them in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
This was a real thing.
And certainly when I was at school, it was still sort of the recognized syllabus history in primary school. We would learn about Roman roads, pit ponies, the Globe Theatre, and the Battle of Waterloo. So sort of key themes running through British history. Pit ponies and Industrial Revolution was certainly one of the common things that we'd find out about at school.
That's funny because in the United States now, mining as such is a Rocky Mountain thing. There's still plenty of coal mines in West Virginia and Appalachia, but really most of the coal is coming from South Dakota, North Dakota, and those places. And there's no pit ponies out there, Nick. None of that going on. So we don't talk about that in our history either.
No.
It's as if America was just burned trees down or something, all their history. But
PP is a phallic reference. I don't think for most British people would be what first sprung to mind. Now, when I first heard Chiara say, "Oh, that's PP," then in my head I was thinking Penelope Pitstop, because those wacky races, those cartoons were on almost non-stop in my childhood, and I'm sure Rowling's childhood as well. So.
Wow, the American anti-culture has taken over the world, Nick. Penelope Pitstop, unbelievable. All right, I never would have thought of Penelope Pitstop, but I'm delighted that's something that we have in common, Nick. That the elision of the Atlantic Ocean via wacky races. All right, I brought all this up because of council flats.
Right. Okay.
Now I get that flats are the UK equivalent of apartments.
Yes.
And you've told me that flats is because real houses in the UK are at least 2 stories, and so an apartment is just one flat.
That's right.
And it's like apartments, it's not the whole house, it's just a part of the house. I get it. But what's the council flats thing?
Okay. Brief history of social housing in the UK. So
the socialist paradise.
Exactly. Well, originally, social housing was provided by the employer. So, so if you can imagine in the Industrial Revolution, in the newly formed towns and cities, those rows and rows of back-to-back tenement houses. They were all owned by the factories. Basically, they were owned by the employers. The housing was called tied housing, so it was tied to the job. So if you lost your job, you lost your housing. If you were too old to work, you hoped that at least one of your children was in employment and had a house, and you could move in with them, because the alternative was the poorhouse, was the workhouse. And you just have to read Dickens to understand the horrors of that. Now, in rural areas, it was a little bit different. So on estates, again, the estate cottages were originally tied housing, so it was for the farm workers, and if the lord of the manor was a particularly kindly gentleman, there might be some sort of semi-retirement for his estate workers. As more and more people migrated for the higher wages in the cities, and it was harder to keep hold of rural workers, they had a system of leasing for 3 lives. So you would lease a cottage in return for a sum of money, and you could owe that money against future wages. But you would lease that cottage for 3 lives, and you got to choose who those 3 people were. They had to be living at the time that the lease was taken, but you could choose 3 lives. At the expiry of the third life, the lease ended, and if there was still a family living there connected to one of those 3 lives, they had to purchase that lease again. So essentially, they had to start that lease over again. Now, at the conclusion of the Second World War and the Labour government, it's a socialist government, they decided actually this is not a society that we want to live in. We don't want to live in a society where randomly you find yourself in the workhouse, where if you lose your job, you lose your housing. And so that's where social housing began. Bizarrely, they seem to have held on until really quite recently onto this 3 life system, although it's a little bit more sophisticated. So if you manage to get a council tenancy of a house, you could pass on that tenancy to surviving members of your household twice. So you got 3 lives, but in this system, that third life didn't need to even be born when the first life ended. Just need to be living in the house when the previous person died. After you passed on the tenancy twice, then the tenancy was void, and you had to renegotiate another tenancy with the council. But it's sort of a strange little follow on from what was originally quite a feudal system. The original council housing stock was really very well built. So in my hometown, there is an old council estate, and the houses there are really quite substantial, nice large gardens, nice big bedrooms. You wouldn't call them palatial, but they're solid and well built. Dating from the 30s and 40s, and they're still doing extremely well.
But Aunt Marge plays a role here. Tell me, don't neglect Saint Margaret here.
So Saint Margaret greatly reduced the amount of social housing stock there is in the United Kingdom. So
we have to mention her last name. We're being too cute here.
Margaret Thatcher. Yes. So in the late 70s, early 80s, a fair proportion, I would guess, and this is just a guess, but I would guess up to half of all families in the UK lived in a council house. Margaret Thatcher decided that because so much of the housing stock was council owned, people were finding it very difficult to buy their own house. And actually private houses were, because they were in short supply, more expensive maybe than they should have been. So she decided she was going to create a system that allowed council tenants to purchase their own house. And depending upon how long they'd lived there as tenants, the price of the house would come down to a level actually that an awful lot of families, they would just be crazy not to take the government up on this offer. So I mentioned this council housing estate in Lantwick Major. I think almost all, if not, well, no, I know of at least one that's still council owned, but almost all of those houses are privately owned. And you can tell that now because they all have different coloured front doors, because the council doesn't come around and paint them, and they'll have different windows, and they're very proud of making the houses a little bit different from the one next door, which is, I'm a private house owner. That's what we do. We want to make our house look like the nicest house on the street. But of course,
your house is the nicest house on the street, incidentally.
Well, it's kind of you to say that, John. You are, of course, right. So there is much less council housing stock. Now, we have another council housing estate in my town, and this was built rather in the 30s and 40s. This was built in the 60s and the 70s. And it is, I guess, our equivalent of no, it's not fair to compare it to anything like casual vacancy, but it is built of concrete. It's not as well built. They're smaller houses with smaller bedrooms. It doesn't look as nice. Even though they're much newer than the old council stock, they come down comparatively quicker. Very much fewer of these houses were bought by their tenants. And I think it's fairly obvious as to why. If you have a nice house, you want to buy it. If you haven't got a nice house, you're less pushed to do that. Now, we live in a town, so there are a few council flats which are essentially family homes that have been converted, one flat upstairs, one flat downstairs, but they're quite few in number. When Rowling talks of council flats, she really means high-rise flats. Again, built in the 50s and 60s, largely in towns and cities. And these would have the quite small bedrooms, quite small kitchens, quite small living rooms.
And that's what we see when Strike and Robin visit Daz, Mandy, and Cliff.
Yes.
When they're going to Rupert Fleetwood's council flat on St. George Street.
That's right.
And the Muslim, the beautiful Muslim family upstairs. Now those are the first big breaks in the case.
Yes.
But in terms of the Lake Spring, this is why you're answering this question, Nick. Rowling famously lived in a council flat for a period of time, and she said it was a glorified bedsit. Again,
yes.
What is a bedsit?
So bedsits are not social housing. They are private rented accommodation. I think almost always. I can't say popular with students, but students tend to end up living in them. So a bedsit is basically a one-room lease. So in the same room, you would wash, you would cook, you would eat, you would relax in the evening, and you would sleep. So it's short for bed sitting room. And you would have probably a small cooker in there and a kettle and probably a wash basin. The bed would be fold down because there wouldn't be room to do anything else in the room. Fairly grim accommodation. Usually it would be Victorian housing, and you would have a group of bed sits, basically each room made into an individual apartment, and you'd have a shared bathroom for that floor. Fairly grim living. Council would not be allowed to have that as social housing. So it's not suitable accommodation, really. So you wouldn't have a council flat as a bedsit. Rowling described her first flat as a glorified bedsit, by which I think she means not a bedsit. So she would have certainly had separated sleeping and living accommodation.
Now we've seen that place.
Yes.
It looks quite nice now, right? I mean, it's
yes, it does. It does. So and Rowling was surprised when she saw it. She said she wouldn't mind living there now, but she would have had a small bedroom.
Do you believe that, Nick? I think I want to test that theory. But
yeah, I suspect her writing room is bigger than that now. So she would have had a small bedroom. She would have had a small kitchen, living room combined, and she would have had a separate but private bathroom, probably a shower and WC kind of bathroom. So it would have been small, but it would not have been a bed set.
Okay, so this is all right. You've helped me with my vocabulary test. Please, all of our listeners, if you're in the U.S. or even Australia, Aurora, how about there? I mean, you guys always talk to me about stuff I don't know. I should know that you know them all out there. Okay, great. But if you've came across some UKism or Britishism, and don't come to me with the questions, bounce those to Nick. Put them in the comments, and
Okay, so my question for you, John. So Rowling had a dream. And I think that's confused certainly it's confused me. So she's sleeping next to Murphy, but she's dreaming about being at Ramsey Silver with Strike, and the showroom is filled with cuddly toys instead of Masonic swords and aprons. I mean, that's we know it's rolling, so it can't be random. But what does it mean?
So, it's on me. I get to decipher this. This is John with the Rosetta Stone text. Anyway, this we know I don't know what it means. Let's go to this. This is just going to be John throwing something at the wall here to see if it sticks. What we do know is it's beginning of chapter 22. It's on page 173, 174. If you want to look at this. We know that when Rowling writes a dream inside her books, it's almost always a snapshot of what that person needs to be thinking about, what's really going on in their life, and it's wish fulfillment, it's secret desires, it's greatest fears, all those things rolled into one. I mean, in Harry Potter, one of the great pleasures of rereading Harry Potter is to go back and when Harry has a dream, you're like, oh, it's the eagle, hawk or whatever it is. It's Draco's thing. He saw that, but he didn't understand what it meant. And now if he only knew, I mean, those are great moments.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that this is one of those moments because we get that chapter is Robin talking to Strike. Murphy doesn't question her about it because Murphy's kind of in free fall from the whole botched investigation, and he's being investigated by the Met. And she decides that, she sensed that Murphy would welcome neither sympathy nor questions, so she hadn't mentioned the Mail article or any of the spin-offs. But it was impossible not to suspect that Murphy had personally been involved. Now that we find out later that she really regrets that if she had really been in love with him and engaged with him, she would have still pressed him how uncomfortable it was to find out what's going on in his life. But she's already in a way pulling back from this, thinking that she's nurturing him and protecting him, but really violating any kind of the grounds of a relationship. The next page, she wanted only to be supportive and give him a respite from his stress and perhaps his guilt. Okay, Robin. I mean, you're blowing this on two levels. You're falling into the nurturing mode when this guy needs an ear. He needs someone to talk to and trust him. Instead, you're lying to him, he's lying to you, and you're pretending that state of affairs is somehow normal. And then we get to he goes to bed, he kisses the top of her head and said, "I'm so effing lucky to have you. And I'm lucky to have you too," she said, kissing him back. Now, there's no effing involved in the scene, but that's kind of a weird thing to say. I wonder if he was drunk when he said that. But anyway, she falls asleep. He rolled away from her asleep. Robin lay awake in the dark, ruminating on Strike's call and its possible ramifications. What she really wanted to do was to slide out of bed and call her detective partner back, but she didn't want to wake Murphy. So she stayed where she was, finally falling asleep to dream. Now, again, she didn't want to wake Murphy, which is really her failure to talk to him and to wake him up and stuff. But she wanted to call Strike because that's really where her core relationship is. And so she has this dreams that she and Strike were standing in Ramsey Silver, which for some mysterious reason had been filled with cuddly toys instead of Masonic swords and aprons. Now, I don't think that's especially difficult to see what that's about, Nick, is that she has incredibly repressed all of her angst and pain and anxiety about having children, because cuddly toys are two things. One, in her mind, cuddly toys is Valentine's Day with Matt Cunliffe giving her the big plushy elephant toy. And I don't know if it's happened yet. And I don't think we're at Valentine's Day in this book yet, but Murphy's going to give her a cuddly toy again, not knowing that he's on Valentine's Day, not knowing that's not the move to make. But so cuddly toys are both signs of affection between man and a woman on a kind of an adolescent level, but mostly they're the kind of toys that she gets for her nephews and nieces and Masham. So why would she have a dream where Ramsay's silver is filled with cuddly toys. Well, and she's with Strike there. Well, here we have the conflation of Robin's Eros and Teros thing. She's in bed with a man, and that's Eros. He says he's so effing lucky to have her while they're in a position of intimacy. And she dreams of Anteros, selfless love, with Strike investigating. This is where her heart really is investigating. But overlaid on top of that is, I want a relationship that will have children. I want to be this mothering, nurturing character, because that's what she's doing with Murphy. She's cuddling and nurturing him like he's a small child, not wanting to give him bad dreams or whatever. And she combines that in her dream, per Freudian theory. It's a wish fulfillment theory. So she can have both her Anteros experience inside the vault, investigating a mystery, and that nurturing relationship with Strike, where there's children involved, kind of the mother nurturing figure, whatever. And that's my theory, Nick. And go ahead and tell me how stupid that is.
I think that's a superb theory. You
All
won't
right.
find me knocking that down.
All right. This is my show. I get Harry Bingham, and I get, this is really, I'm really on it here. So we've talked about the fish pea theory. I love that. We've been getting it. I think is it Sandy Hope? Forgive me, Sandra Hope or Sandy Hope?
Sandy, I think.
Sandy. Well, she's written me privately, and she's posted us on the board about something that Nick and I were prepared to talk about on this show. And this is great. Thank you for that bounce pass there. And that is the beginning of the, I think, well, really, I love, I know, I think
I know.
Well, I know really that I love him meme. And we get that, a lot in this book. Robin, do we have an actual count on that, Nick? Do we have a count on how many times?
We have to count that, do we? That's a task for tomorrow. I will count out how many think knows we have.
But the thing that, our Hog Pro, All Pro reader came up with was something that I noticed as well when I was charting the book, which is that the first person to do the I think I know meme is Decima Mullins about Rupert on page 11. Really? Yeah. And that's no small thing, because if it was just Robin and her, confusion, you'd think, oh, well, that's just part of Robin's confusion, that she doesn't know what she knows and this kind of thing. But really, it's Decima Mullins as well about Rupert, that she thinks that, well, I know that he loved me and I love him type thing. That's, I think, it's the defining case to be solved in both the surface agency mystery, what is the relationship between Decima and Rupert really, and the Ellicott Strike agony in Hallmarked Man, which is when are these two people going to have an open communication thing about what they actually know? And this gets back to, and this is important because of Rowling's. One of the working titles for my PhD thesis was the examination of the real, or the revelation of the real, because Rowling repeatedly in key scenes talks about the real.
Yeah.
Not just what you think, but what is real. But most famously in the Dumbledore Harry Potter exchange at King's Cross. Of course it's happening inside your head, Harry, but why would you think it's not real? Right? Because that logos reality is the fabric of reality. That's the only real thing that there really is. Then in Troubled Blood, I'm not sure it's at Skegness. I guess it's one of their outdoor pub scenes or whatever. They talk about astrology, and Strike is like, it's not real. None of it's real. And of course. That's what solves the crime. It's like, there's something in there which is real. And then we have, to me, the most important scene in Christmas Pig, which may be Rowling's best book ever, is the Blue Bunny, when he realizes that Jack Jones is a real boy. You're real, he says. And the blue bunny then immediately sacrifices himself because here's a person who has come down from reality, which is above, to rescue something that he loves. And the blue bunny, really, in imitation, sacrifices himself to do that. And of course, it's immediately raised to the real by Roland's cameo appearance with the her daughter. Now, that's that. I mean, that may be one defining scene in all of Roland's work. That's probably it, and it's about the real. Hallmarked Man. They don't really talk about the real that much, but that I think, I know, is the difference between is the quest for surety about something as important as whether I love somebody or not, or whether there's a reality of a relationship here. And Robin is fighting it because she's hesitant, hence the I think. And then she's guilty. Oh no, it's not just thinking. This is a surety. I know type thing, which underlines the fact that it's not a surety. So it's the defining case. Decima brings it up, and it's all about the Rupert and Decima thing. And finally, it's an incestuous relationship, and so they can't have anything but an anti-erotic relationship.
No.
Right? And that's, as Strike explains at the end, that's more than okay for them to have this child is going to grow up with two loving parents, all right, who are not in an erotic love match. And Strike explains, most children would find that just okay, more than okay. Right? If that were really what was going on, they had a selfless love between their parents and a love for the full-on parental love for the child. That's a great thing. I think we'll look back at Hallmark Man and say, there it is. If Robin is indeed sterile, consequent to this, or decides not to have children, and she and Strike become a love match, it won't be because they're going to have children. And Strike, though, may have a child, right? Strike. We're still in the business of finding out about Bijou and that baby. Now, that's a bit of a setup there. But most important, I think, is for readers, fourth generation readers, to be saying, we're really talking about the real here. And there's another clue to that. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this. This doesn't come up on any of the threads or anything. And that's the death of Roundtree. I think it's go ahead.
I don't know how, again, I'm not sure if this is well understood by Americans, but Roundtree is a superb name for the breed of dog. So the breed of dog is a chocolate Labrador, and there are three great Victorian chocolate manufacturers that are still sort of market leaders today in the UK. You have Cadbury's, Fry's, and Roundtree. So Roundtree is a brand of chocolate. Great name for a chocolate Labrador. I think that the founders actually of certainly Cadbury and Roundtree's were both Quakers. So both
Roundtree's as well. Roundtree's as well. And the Roundtree's differ in where they're located, right?
Yes.
They're Yorkshire, right?
Yes, that's right. So
this is good. I mean, I'm going to put down below a link to an article I wrote about just this subject, about Roundtree and rolling and chocolate. But just briefly, chocolate is the background flavor and food of Rolling's work, bar none. And I wrote a thing about Troubled Blood and the Poison Chocolates for the really lengthy rundown of almost every mention of chocolate in Strike 5. I mean, there's and I also cover all the ones in Harry Potter, most specifically their use in recovery from Dementor attacks. All right. Now this is, that Roundtree is named for a chocolate, and it's a chocolate lab. Now that's clever. But what's really important is what Nick mentioned there is the connection between chocolate and Quakerism in the United Kingdom. Now, this is, you were talking about basically company towns in your discussion of council flats.
Yeah.
The first industry that really tried to move away from that and really have an enlightened, version of a company town were the Quaker chocolate factories, and explicitly, Cadbury of Birmingham, Rowntree's of York, and Fry's of Bristol. Okay, these chocolate was a great gift. Everybody loves chocolates, but it was also a way to support these communities that were an alternative to the great moral evil of alcohol. Chocolates was a better thing than alcohol, but also because they had business integrity and they took care of their workers. And again, there's long articles on there's long sections on this you can read in the thing down below. But this is the part that gets me. Is the epitaphs in Deathly Hallows are from Scripture, but they resonate with the epigraph at the beginning, which is from William Penn. And that William Penn's passage is, this selection from Fruits of Solitude is really about this logos fabric of reality and the brotherhood we have with everyone. Now, Penn refers to friends in that thing. He's really talking about his Quaker companions as his friends, that they never really go away, that they always have this relationship, because this logos within them, this, they call it the light within them, is their union with God in Christ. And Rowling, by referring to William Penn as a member of, as a citizen of the UK, and really drilling down on the Rowntree thing, the chocolate lab joke, it's Yorkshire, etc., cute joke, but with Rowling's history with chocolate and its meaning, and her awareness of Quaker history evident and theology evident in her use of that epigraph, which is it cued the entire series, according to her, after the second book, shows that this is really that Coleridgean or Steckian logos epistemology that is the hallmark of all Inkling literature. It's incredibly important. But Nick, Rowntree dies here.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not the happy moment of
No.
Rowntree having gas, or Rowntree thumping his tail, or Rowntree. There's just kind of the background of the family home in Yorkshire. Rowntree dies, and that's an agony. And it takes place at the time that children are being born, and we have almost twins being born, Barnaby and Dirk, which are about as different as you could possibly get, right? Barnaby having a weird coincidental association with death and murder, and Dirk being a knife. But you have the happy family and the unhappy family. And then you have the death of Rowntree, and you have the appearance of a puppy. There's some kind of rebirth there in the Masham family after that. All right, so that's a work in progress. But really, the marker of Rowntree's death means that the Masham Ellicotts are about to go through a huge transition. That there's going to be crisis after crisis. But she calls first with the death of Rowntree, and then we get the agonizing birth of Martin's child, and his agony with his what's her name again, Nick? What's it's a meaningful name. Carmen. Carmen. That's Carmen. Right. Carmen. We know it's going to be an agonizing scene when Carmen names her son Dirk.
Yes, not a shrinking violet.
Anyway, so that again goes to circle this about again. Maybe we're doing our own little ring composition here, Nick. That's back to the mise en abyme of the story, is that we get Rowntree's death and then the new puppy. At the same time that the Ellicotts are going through this wild transition. that sends Martin down to save Robin's life. Because if Martin's not there on Robin's doorstep,
No.
End of story. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's going to be a whole different thing. And so it's really providential. All that plays out, almost Ghost of Roundtree, maybe. All right. Whew. Nick, what else have we got through all of our questions today?
I think we've done very well. We've gone all through them. But as we've been talking, people are still writing on that Substack, asking us further questions. So this is like the labors of Sisyphus, but a much more pleasurable activity.
Yeah, and I should say that the reason we're doing Q&A right now is because the paid subscribers and I are going through the book's structure, and so we're not doing the weekly segment on a shed tool, or with some lake spring highlighting and golden thread backdrop. We're at the point now where the shed tools you have to do a lot more work, and I'm working simultaneously on the alchemy. I'm really trying to get the king and queen aspects of alchemy down. Basically, the strikes Negretto in Troubled Blood and Ink Black Heart is followed by the queen's crisis and purification in Running Grave and Hallmarked Man. And we're finally going to see the sort of the chrysalis of the two of them rising up in the alembic together as the soul's unification with the spirit. I think that's definitely going to happen with the old crone psychologists coming in for the Rebetto to really lay out. And she's going to be the hammer that gets Robin to understand the boundaries that she needs with Strike, or the boundaries that she needs in her life, so that she can pursue her vocation and still have the fullness of life as a woman. So very exciting. Hallmarked Man, again, big setup for Strikes 9 and 10, and a book that is really rich in all the tools and the springs and threads that we talk about here on the Fourth Generation Workshop. To really a little bit back to the beginning, I couldn't be more excited about this, Nick. I mean, seriously, the two of us, it's been fun. The two of us, we've been doing this every Saturday morning for, I don't know how many years, but a couple of years now. And we always thought, wow, we should record these things. And now to have people from all over the world joining in that conversation and showing that we're not just, two loons on a rock somewhere, having a conversation.
We're not saying we're not two loons on a rock, but we're not just two loons on a rock. Yeah.
Look, there go a flock of loons. They're coming to stay with us. If you've ever taken a long walk with Nick along the sound that separates him from what is that? Is that just southern England on the side there?
It is. That's Somerset. That's who we can see Exmoor and the Quantocks. We can see where Coleridge
that's my connection there.
Yeah.
Seriously, my next trip, I don't know if I have to swim across that sound or what, but I want to knock on that guy's door.
I spoke to my sailing friend on the weekend because I'd never heard of anybody swimming across the Bristol Channel from our point, and he said no, it's never been done. Do you know this is the second fastest tidal race in the world? Yeah.
That really is amazing, because channel swimmers are notoriously insane.
I know, and people cross the English Channel. I mean, almost all the time, and it's much further.
They do back and forth,
and it is much further. But apparently, the tidal race is so swift, it's almost impossible. And he's never heard of anyone doing it from our point on the coast.
Well, I'm sure that he would know. I mean, that's wow. I lived in Northwest Washington State, and the channel there, basically that feeds the Puget Sound from the Pacific Ocean, is between Port Angeles, Washington, and Vancouver, Canada. And it wasn't until I think the late 1950s, early 1960s that a swimmer successfully crossed it. And they tried again and again, again and again.
Yeah.
A guy eventually put on like 40 pounds of fat because there's rules. You can't wear a wetsuit because it's buoyant.
Okay.
And so if you can't wear a wetsuit and you're that far north, I mean, that's rough.
Yeah.
But it was mostly the cold. It wasn't the speed of the strait. Wow. Okay, Nick. All of our marathon swimmers, there's your challenge, the Bristol Channel. I'm astonished that there's a channel in the UK that hasn't been.
Yeah.
I mean, there must be times when it's slower than, or is it just always that fast?
So we have, of course, we have slack tide at high water and low water slack tide, but that just lasts minutes. So
you just
day,
get far enough out to get in trouble is what you're saying.
Yeah. So I mean, even if you could swim it in 10 hours, you're going to have one full tidal cycle, which means you're going to be somewhere out in the Irish Sea,
Even if you're swimming straight on against it, if it's that fast, it's just going to take you down.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. All right. Probably no interest at all to our listeners, but anyway, if you ever walk along that channel with Nick, and I hope we should have a tour. We should have a Hogwarts Professor meeting in your burg.
That would be fun.
Is there a Masonic Hall nearby?
Not in. We used to have one in Lantwick Major, but that's been converted into flats. So Barry, I think, is our closest Masonic hall. And I've actually been. I was invited into that Masonic hall for a formal dance a few years ago, but I wasn't allowed to see any of the Masonic stuff. My wife was taken around, but I wasn't allowed in there.
Well, you'll have to see if we can rent that hall, Nick.
Yeah.
And especially it being, how do you spell Barry? Is it Barri?
Barry in English, and you are spot on for the Welsh spelling. Barri.
Well, it's because of Saint Nicholas of Myra and Lycia. His relics are in Bari, Italy. And I don't doubt, Nick, that England, being the seafaring nation that it once was, that it was because of their devotion to St. Nicholas that they named that town Bari. Anyway, I can't wait.
Could well be.
Especially as you also are a devotee of St. Nicholas, being a Nick yourself. That we'll have to look into going to Bari for our first Hogwarts Professor meeting. We're a long way from Hawaii. I know people are talking about Hawaii and Balboa Park, which is very nice, but I don't know if Nick's going to be able to get there. Anyway, thank you for this. I'm off
you,
to
John.
work. Again, suggestions about our intro, please type in what you want us to do.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you everyone in Substack land. Take care.